King Solomon. The name echoes through history. He inherited a kingdom forged by his father, David. Solomon, however, was destined to be a different kind of king. He was a man of peace, a builder, and a wise ruler. His reign marked a time of prosperity and expansion for Israel. Solomon's wisdom was legendary. It was a gift from God, granted in answer to Solomon's humble request. This wisdom guided his decisions and shaped his reign. Under Solomon's rule, Israel experienced a golden age. Peace settled over the land. The wars that had defined David's reign were over. Solomon used this time of peace to strengthen the kingdom, not through military might but through trade, diplomacy, and construction. He understood that true strength came from within, from a prosperous and united people. His reign, however, was not without its challenges. Solomon faced tests of faith, temptations of power, and the constant responsibility of leading God's chosen people. His story, found in 1 Kings 9, is a tapestry of faith, ambition, and the enduring power of God's promises. Solomon's most ambitious project was the construction of the Temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent structure was to be the dwelling place of God, a symbol of his presence among his people. The temple was built with the finest materials: cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, and intricately carved stones. It took 7 years to complete, a testament to the skill of the craftsmen and the dedication of the workers. The Ark of the Covenant, containing the 10 Commandments, was placed in the holiest part of the temple, the Holy of Holies. Alongside the temple, Solomon built a grand palace for himself. It was a magnificent structure, even larger than the temple, and took 13 years to complete. The palace was a symbol of Solomon's power and wealth, a fitting residence for the king of a prosperous nation. The completion of these two monumental structures marked a turning point in Solomon's reign. They were tangible symbols of his devotion to God and his commitment to the well-being of his people. The temple and the palace stood as testaments to Solomon's ambition, his faith, and the prosperity of Israel under his rule. One night, God appeared to Solomon in a dream. He stood in the newly completed temple, his glory filling the space. It was a moment of awe and trepidation. Solomon, overwhelmed by the presence of the Almighty, fell to his knees. God spoke, his voice echoing through the temple. He was pleased with Solomon's offering, the magnificent temple built in his honor. He promised to establish Solomon's throne forever if he remained faithful. But God's message was not without caution. He warned Solomon against straying from his path. He reminded him of the covenant made with his father David. If Solomon or his descendants turned away from God, worshipped other gods, and disobeyed his decrees, their kingdom would be ripped away and given to another. The weight of these words settled upon Solomon. He understood the gravity of God's promise and the severity of his warning. The fate of his reign, his lineage, and his kingdom rested on his obedience to God. Solomon's reign was marked by peaceful relations with neighboring kingdoms. One of his closest allies was Hiram, the king of Tyre. Hiram had been a friend to David, and he continued this alliance with Solomon. He provided skilled craftsmen and materials for the construction of the temple and the palace. After the completion of the temple, Solomon gifted Hiram with 20 towns in Galilee. This gesture of goodwill solidified their alliance and facilitated trade between the two kingdoms. Hiram, however, was not entirely pleased with the gift. He journeyed to Galilee to inspect the towns and found them less than satisfactory. The Bible tells us that he called the land Cabul, which can be interpreted as good for nothing. Despite this, the alliance between Solomon and Hiram remained strong. This exchange illustrates the complexities of international relations, even in ancient times. Gifts, though well-intentioned, could be met with mixed feelings. Yet the overarching goal of peace and cooperation prevailed. The construction of the temple and the palace were only the beginning of Solomon's ambitious building projects. He fortified Jerusalem, strengthening its walls and gates, making it a city of formidable defense. He also built cities throughout his kingdom, strategic outposts that secured his borders and facilitated trade. One of these cities was Gezer, a strategic location on the coastal plain. Solomon rebuilt and fortified Gezer, which had been destroyed earlier. He understood the importance of controlling key trade routes and securing his kingdom from potential invaders. Solomon's building projects extended beyond cities and fortifications. He constructed store cities, chariot cities, and cities for his horsemen. He built reservoirs to provide water for his people and his livestock. His kingdom was a testament to his vision and his ability to mobilize resources on a grand scale. These projects, however, came at a cost. They required vast amounts of labor and resources, which placed a heavy burden on the Israelites. Section 6. Labor and Tribute. The Price of Progress. To fuel his ambitious building projects, Solomon instituted a system of forced labor. He conscripted Israelites to work on his projects, a practice that differed from the way his father David had ruled. David had relied on volunteers and paid laborers. Solomon's system, however, placed a heavy burden on the people. The Bible tells us that Solomon conscripted 30,000 men for forced labor. They were divided into groups, with 10,000 working for a month in the forests of Lebanon, then returning home for 2 months before their next rotation. While Israelites were subjected to forced labor, foreigners living within the kingdom were treated differently. They were not conscripted for this work. Instead, they paid tribute, providing resources and manpower for Solomon's projects. This system of forced labor and tribute, while essential for Solomon's ambitious building projects, created a social and economic divide within the kingdom. It also highlighted a departure from the principles of equality and justice that had characterized his father's reign. Section 7. Sacrifices and Observances, Solomon's Religious Life. Despite the challenges and the temptations of power, Solomon remained devoted to God, at least for a significant part of his reign. He continued the religious practices established by his father David. He offered sacrifices at the temple, acknowledging God's sovereignty and seeking his guidance. The Bible tells us that Solomon offered thousands of burnt offerings at the altar in Gibeon, a high place of worship. These sacrifices were a central part of Israelite worship, symbolizing atonement for sins and dedication to God. Solomon also observed religious festivals, such as the Feast of Tabernacles, with great pomp and ceremony. He understood the importance of these festivals in uniting the people and fostering a sense of shared identity and faith. However, as Solomon's reign progressed, he began to stray from the path of righteousness. He allowed his foreign wives to influence his religious practices, leading him to worship other gods. This would ultimately lead to God's judgment and the division of the kingdom after Solomon's death. Section 8. Riches from the Sea. Solomon's naval expeditions. Solomon's reign was not only marked by ambitious building projects and religious observances but also by daring naval expeditions. He established a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, a port on the Red Sea. These ships, manned by experienced sailors from Tyre, embarked on long voyages to distant lands. They brought back riches beyond imagination: gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. These expeditions transformed Israel into a major trading power. The wealth they generated contributed to the kingdom's prosperity and Solomon's legendary riches. The Bible tells us that silver became as common as stones in Jerusalem during Solomon's reign. These naval expeditions highlight Solomon's ambition and his desire to expand the horizons of his kingdom. They also demonstrate his understanding of the importance of trade and international relations in building a prosperous and influential nation. Section 9. A Reign of Prosperity. Solomon's enduring legacy. Solomon's reign, as described in 1 Kings 9, was a time of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and expansion for Israel. He solidified the kingdom established by his father David, transforming it into a regional power. His wisdom, his building projects, and his international relations left an enduring legacy. The temple he built stood as a symbol of God's presence among his people for centuries. His wisdom became legendary. His proverbs and songs passed down through generations. However, Solomon's reign also serves as a cautionary tale. The Bible tells us that his heart turned away from God in his later years. He allowed wealth and power to corrupt him, leading him to compromise his faith and disobey God's decrees. Solomon's story reminds us that even the wisest and most prosperous can stray from the path of righteousness. It underscores the importance of remaining faithful to God, even when surrounded by wealth, power, and the temptations of the world.